what I want to talk about is the fact that as statisticians we get to play in anybody's backyard, everybody's backyard. And I think that's the theme of today, looking at the range of different talks that you've heard. And I was just downstairs and hearing the application section, and 3 completely different application areas. To me, it's one of the exciting things about being a statistician. And I've made lots and lots of changes in my career. Some people have worked and built up a depth in a particular area. I haven't done that. I've got breadth in terms of picking and mixing lots of different sorts of jobs. And so, as you'll see in a minute, I've done sort of a lot of what I call right-angle turns. And when I make a decision about changing a job, I want to go into something that is going to challenge me, is probably a bit frightening at first, but also utilises some of the skills that I've built up in previous jobs. So that's why I call it a right-angle turn. It's not a complete turnabout. It's using some of what I've learnt, but it's also about being challenged. So I'm very susceptible to what I call the 7-year itch, not in relationships, but in jobs. When I get to about 6 or 7 years, I get a bit bored and I want something new. Now, I'm a social statistician, and you have had some talks today from people who work in similar areas, particularly from government statistics. And social statistician, I would define in this way, as collecting, analysing, and interpreting data in order to shape social policy. The area that I've worked most in through quite a lot of my jobs is actually in the defining of the social issues and the identifying of policy options. And it's much more about the understanding of what data we need and how we might collect it than it is about analysis of data. So I'm much more on the front end in the statistical work that I've done. Social statisticians work with a range of different social scientists in many different areas, so I'm sure I've missed out many areas here, but economics, demography, psychology, political science, anthropology, history, sociology. So at different times I've worked with different groups of social scientists. And this slide just gives you some of the issues that social statisticians might be concerned with. And I'm not going to go through and read out all of those, but it's to give you a flavour of the wide range of different topics. And one of the things that I think it sort of underpins the whole of the work is that you can't actually manage, you can't develop new policies, sound policies, if you don't actually understand the circumstances of the population. So it is about, you can't manage what you don't measure. And sometimes when I talk about it, I also talk about the risk of assuming that what you measure is what's important, which is sort of the counterbalance to that. And as statisticians, I think it's really important that we always remain relatively humble, because there are things that we don't measure, we don't measure well. So there are opportunities for social statisticians throughout central government, not just in the statistical service, but also in the economic service, the social research services. In local government, in charitable organisations, trade unions, pressure and lobby groups, policy think tanks, research centres, funding bodies, and international agencies, etc., etc. And you'll see that I've worked in a few of these different places. So, some of the highlights of my career: I started off as a survey statistician working in government. That was immediately after doing an undergraduate degree. I did further education later on an evenings basis, not even part-time, an evenings basis. So I went straight in at the age of 22 into government as a survey statistician. And then subsequently moved in the same sort of area, but into an independent research agency, what is now known as the National Centre for Social Research. Later in my career, I got really interested in the whole issue of data and data access and the critical role that data plays in social policy, and the fact that researchers, particularly researchers in universities, couldn't collect the data themselves, but were reliant upon government data. And so I became director of the UK Data Archive, which still exists. It's hosted at the University of Essex. It's now part of a broader virtual network of data centres. But basically, the Data Archive, my role there was to negotiate for data and to preserve and make those data available for research purposes. I moved from there to being Director of Statistics at UNESCO, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute. I was the founding Chief Executive of what's known as the Health and Social Care Information Centre, which is based in Leeds, part of the NHS, an arm's length body in the NHS system. From there I moved to being Special Advisor in the African Centre for Statistics, part of the UN Economic Commission for Africa, which is based in Ethiopia. So I was based in Addis Ababa. And then did what really was a right angle turn, which was to go into straight academia, and that was to be Dean of the School of Social Science and Public Policy. And I still think it was pretty risky of King's College London to recruit somebody who hadn't been a straightforward academic to come in as Dean of a large faculty, 8,000 students, 400 academic staff, the biggest faculty in King's College London, in fact. That was a 5-year appointment. When I got to 4 years, they asked me if I would do another 5, and I thought 10 is a bit too long. I was thinking my 7-year itch, and so I agreed with them that I would do an extra 2, and so I did 7 years as Dean of the School of Social Science and Public Policy, and then was approached about going to Oxford, which was a complete shock because I'd never been a student or staff member at Oxford, and I didn't think that Oxford ever recruited people to be heads of colleges from outside of Oxford. And it's quite true, they usually don't. But Green Templeton College is really very special. It's a graduate college, 600 graduate students from 69 countries of the world. The only one of Oxford colleges to have 21st century statutes, the only one of the Oxford colleges not to have a high table, the only one of the Oxford colleges where there's no facilities in our college that aren't available to students as well as fellows, as well as staff. So it's fabulous. It's absolutely fabulous. Very scary, because I don't understand Oxford very well, but a wonderful job. So it's just to give you a flavour of the fact that I've done lots of different things. And you might think, well, a lot of those jobs aren't really statistics. And that's true, but I can say that my statistical training and my statistical background is of relevance and of use in every single one of those jobs. At the moment, in my current job, I report to a governing body of 50 senior professors across from Oxford. You can imagine the egos in that room. My college is management and medicine in the main, a few applied social sciences, but it's mainly management and medicine. So very senior people from across management and medicine, and I report to them, I chair that governing body, I report to that governing body, I'm accountable to that governing body, and I prepare all the papers for that governing body. So it's really weird, very strange. A lot of that is about performance of the college. A lot of it is about interpretation and communication of statistical information. I'm currently undergoing some training because I've assumed that I understand too much about finance. I've assumed I understand more about finances than I've discovered I do. And depreciation of buildings and fundraising and how you raise bonds and things like this. Statistical expertise gets you a certain distance, but it doesn't get you far enough. So even in my mid-60s, I am going and doing some additional training. And it's quite hard to do that because I don't learn as quickly as I used to, but it's really important. And I wouldn't want a job where I wasn't frightened some of the time. Because when you're frightened, I think adrenaline flows and you work much better. So it's really important to me that I challenge myself. So I thought it would be nice if I just said some of the things that I've done in those jobs. Because I think, again, if you thought from the perspective of a statistician, you might not consider yourself to be working in such a wide variety of different areas. So when I was aged 23, I think it was, I was seconded to UK Royal Commission on the Homeless as the statistician to the Royal Commission. And so one of the tasks that the commissioners gave me was to estimate the number of homeless in the United Kingdom, because that was quite an important aspect of a Royal Commission on the Homeless. So you might like to think about how you would tackle such a task. I was seconded to that Royal Commission for about 8 months, and it was really fabulous, working alongside very senior public servants and tackling some really difficult statistical issues. Later in my career, I got very interested in international statistics, and I went to China to train census controllers. In China, they have this pyramid system of training the census staff, and at that census, there were more census enumerators than we have population. So the training task was just massive. And I went to China, travelled all around China with a little group of interpreters who, by the time we'd finished, could give my talk much better than I could. Training census controllers, just absolutely fantastic. And that was at a time when China wasn't really very, very open. So it was an amazing experience. I was given responsibility in my mid-20s for the sampling branch of the Government Social Survey. So I had to design all of the samples for the Government Social Surveys and then train the staff who drew those samples. And I had responsibility for the electoral register room, which is where all the electoral rolls for the country were kept on paper. They weren't electronic in those days. I told you I'm very old. I got really concerned about the deficiencies in government surveys due to the fact that not everybody gets on the electoral register. Not everybody is eligible to get on the electoral register, and a lot of people don't get on the electoral register even though they are eligible. Particularly you miss young people who are more mobile, who live in temporary accommodation, etc. So I started some work on would it be better for us to use the postcode address file for sampling rather than the electoral register, and developed a system of postcode sampling. Gave a paper at the Royal Statistical Society, which is one of the scariest things I've ever done. There were it was especially scary. It was the London School of Hygiene, where the Royal Statistical Society used to have the lectures, and people were sitting on the stairs because the room got so full, because there are so many market research companies and government departments who were interested in this topic. So I came out from having done this work with 2 research assistants into actually appreciating how important it was. And the system of postcode sampling, I'm pleased to say, is still used in the government surveys to this day, and by many market research companies. Those that use random sampling, not those that use other forms of non-random sampling. When I moved into what is now the National Centre for Social Research, I was doing work on trying to understand what sort of people refused to participate in the surveys, because one of the critical things is that we could see response rates gradually falling. At that time, we were getting response rates well up into the 80%, but they're much, much lower these days. But even though they were in the 80% range, we were very concerned that the people who didn't participate were different, and that very often they were people on the fringes of society, the more marginalised, often the people that you really care about in terms of your government policy. If you're developing a policy for welfare payments, for example, it matters if you miss people on the fringes of society. So again, you might think about how you would do that, ethically, how you would do that. When I was at the Data Archive, I learned that economists needed to have access to tax information at an individual level in order to be able to develop policies and evaluate the government policies. So I had to go into the tax offices and negotiate for anonymised records, tax records, to be available for academic purposes. Which I did, and for many years they were available. I'm really sad to say they are no longer available. I'm trying to do something about that. I moved to UNESCO to set up an Institute for Statistics. There was a division of statistics that reported in exactly the same way as cleaning and catering, because statistics is a service, isn't it? And it wasn't seen as a profession in the organisation. And the statistical products of UNESCO were ridiculed around the world because nobody believed in the data. And so I was recruited to set up a new statistics agency within UNESCO and to recruit the staff and set up the statistical constitution for UNESCO. So that was great, very challenging, but great fun. And in that post, I did all sorts of things. I travelled to 110 countries of the world. That's half the countries of the world, I guess you all know. There are 220 or so. Which sounds exotic and exciting, and is exotic and exciting, but is pretty wearing, pretty tiring too. And whilst I did that, I did some magnificent things, such as visiting a school in Senegal with Kofi Annan, who was just magnificent. It was a very political job. Governments would give us data that were not believable. Governments would give us data that were good news stories, because that's what they wanted, to tell the world about their performance. And I had to contest that data. sometimes with ministers, sometimes with ambassadors, sometimes with prime ministers or presidents. And I had responsibility for reporting on the Millennium Development Goals relating to education and gender. When I was working in Addis Ababa, one of the things that I did on my Sundays when I was off work in the Institute for Statistics, the African Centre for Statistics, was I worked with a small NGO that was measuring children in order to determine their state of malnutrition. And that was a complete departure for me because I hadn't worked in that sort of area before. But many of the principles that I'd learnt in official statistics applied in that area too. So I hope that gives you a flavour of how exciting a job in statistics can be, and how challenging. I've got a few slides, I'm conscious of the time, just a few slides that are a little bit different, that about new challenges as I see them from my perspective. And I'll slip over a couple of these quickly because I think you've been talking about them. I love the African proverb that when the music changes, so does the dance, and that if we fail to listen, we'll be out of step. I think it's really important. And, you know, as young people, you absolutely have to be aware of the fact that the subject of statistics now is completely different from when I studied it at university. I studied statistics as an undergraduate without using a computer. We used Brunsviga machines. You can't imagine how different statistics is these days. So being aware of that and being prepared to change is important. You've had a lot about big data and the increasing use of technology. But I also want to put in a word for sort of the wicked problems and not being afraid to go in there and work with non-statisticians on some of the really important problems that are facing the world, like climate change. Big data, I don't think I need to say what it is because you've covered a lot about it. But there are research challenges in relation to big data. I was talking to some of my colleagues who work in big data the other day in Oxford at Big Data Institute. And the whole issue about what does inference mean, statistical inference in this new environment. The whole issue of dealing with noise in data. I mean, as a sampling statistician, I would say I spent a lot of my career on sampling error. Actually, what I should have spent more of my career on is non-sampling error. I came to that a bit later. There are lots of research challenges in statistics. These are not solved. And so these are just some of the ones that I would identify. And they're not just technical challenges. We also need statisticians who are aware of the broader issues, the legal aspects relating to the ownership of data, communication and dissemination of statistics, issues to do with trust, issues to do with our responsibilities as statisticians, what does privacy mean in the new world, etc. We have some amazing opportunities. As I indicated earlier, I used to work on response rates when they were very high. Now they're falling. All sorts of problems arise. And let me jump over these. Let me get to my final but one slide, I think. Yeah, penultimate slide. World problems. There isn't a single discipline or a scientific domain that can really address the complex challenges. And I think that one of the things that is most exciting for statisticians of your generation is the opportunity to work in teams with other disciplines. Statisticians, I always tell the joke about how do you tell an introvert statistician from an extrovert statistician. An extrovert statistician looks at other people's shoes when he's talking to them. That used to be the image of statisticians. I used to have to try and persuade people as to why statistics is exciting and important. I don't have to do that anymore. People actually recognise that now, and they actually want statisticians as part of their teams. They're looking for statistical expertise. So I think you have an absolutely wonderful, wonderful opportunity. So what skills will you need for the future? Adaptability, transferable skills, don't neglect them, communication skills, presentational skills, building an understanding of talking to people from different disciplines, research and innovation skills, of course. Be the person that asks why the emperor isn't wearing any clothes, because often it's the statistician and the team who can do that. So challenge the preconceptions. Don't mould yourself on my generation, and don't create homogeneous communities. For me, education is about opening minds, not closing them. So it's about getting out there, it's about discussing, it's about engaging. I hope that's, sorry to go over by a couple of minutes, keep you from your wine, but I hope that was helpful.